Good evening. We'll call this regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Education to order. And we invite all of you to join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. It is our great pleasure as a board to welcome Dr. Bonnie Shea Gibson, Superintendent. While you have been on the job for almost a month now, this is the first opportunity that we've actually all had a chance to be together. So it is a great pleasure to see you and welcome you to Jefferson County, you and your family.
Thank you very, very much. It's been a wonderful transition. We feel very blessed. It's been a great opportunity. I've had a chance to meet with 8 out of the 17 principals thus far at their schools and go through the school board office, meet all of the department heads, and begin the process of acclimating myself to Jefferson County schools so that I can help support them moving forward. So thank you very much.
Great, great. Let's see. Do you have any additional anything that you want to begin or inform us on tonight's agenda?
Yes, sir. Once we get past the minutes on the consent agenda, we need to remove item number 15, which is a resignation that was actually accepted in the former meeting. The employee actually submitted 2 resignation letters, one independently themselves and one through their building principal, and they arrived at different times in human resources, and they caught that, but after the
Just out of curiosity, do you know which one we approved at the last meeting?
They had the same ending date.
All right. So let's start with approval of the minutes of the last regular board meeting. Do we have a motion? Second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Janet, do we have any citizens' comments? Okay. So back to the consent agenda. Delete number 15. Any other changes or? Okay.
No, sir.
If not, get a motion before any questions.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions on the consent agenda? If not, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. My son is going to be, he's not going to be accustomed to meetings that is in the room next door that go this long. Old business. None? New business.
So for new business, there are several items before the board. One is action on approval of declaring some air conditioning units that were within trailers that were moved off of the premises to declare them as surplus so that we can sell them and utilize the resources.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. So that presumably there'll be some market for those?
Yes, sir. We anticipate that there will be.
Great, great. Okay, item B. Now this is, again, under new business, board makeup, board vacancies policy to be placed on review.
Yes, sir. Superintendent recommends discussion and consideration of this policy regarding their authority to denote who may serve as a liaison to the board.
Just a couple of thoughts or to kind of get this discussion And I must confess, I've not had a chance to look at the latest proposed. One of the issues that came up Gary will remember this, and Mark, I think you were here, when we had a vacancy on the previous board due to a resignation. And while the state law clearly gives us the authority to appoint individuals to fill an unexpired term, I think several of us on the board felt like we didn't really have a policy in place that made some suggestions about how to do it. Mm-hmm. And so one of the issues that we wanted to address going forward is, if we're ever in that situation again, which we certainly hope we're not, but you never know, that we have taken some effort to think about a process about how to move forward. And if you'll look in here under, I guess it's paragraph 1.52, filling vacancies, because this had last been, as you can see, had last been reviewed over a decade ago, that we essentially establish a process for accepting applications, suggest that we can appoint a committee, including folks that we might consider appointing to such a committee, to review those applications and make a recommendation back to the board. Indeed, just so you know, when I had also suggested in some of the earlier drafts of this that we suggest that the person be a resident of the county for a specific period of time, say 6 months, prior to being eligible to be appointed. I'd also suggested that they have demonstrated proof of participating in local elections, both of which our able school council had advised, while they could be good recommendations, they would not be considered constitutional under the state constitution, so advised us not to include those. So that's one section on the vacancies.
But although perhaps those could be considered criteria for the interview committee to look at when they're making judgments about candidates. So certainly those qualities don't have to be lost in the process.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a good point. You know, I for one, I mean, again, you hope you're not dealing with a situation like this, but if you are, I think that you'd want to know that people that you're considering are engaged and involved in not only the schools but the community, as all of you who serve on this board have demonstrated. So.
Well, it seems to me if we were going to appoint somebody, we would probably know a fair amount. I mean, this community's not that big. I don't know that we need to formalize it that much. We are a committee already elected by the public, charged with that duty. And I'm not sure we need to cloud it by putting a whole lot of extra language in there. I'm satisfied with the way it is now.
I think it's an excellent point. I think back to when we were, and of course you were sitting in this chair at the time, and I know it wasn't easy, but thinking back to as we were going through that process, I wanted I was a little concerned that, that there was no, I mean, it was almost by word of mouth that people who were interested, and I'd like for us to at least have some transparency and for everyone to know that there is a process even before it gets to the board for deliberation on a decision. And so that's just
Well, if a position becomes open, that's easy enough to put an ad in the paper, on the radio, whatever, that would notify people of those things.
Well, I think, again, that's why having it in the policy makes it clear to everyone going forward. The other, I think, major update is under the two. First, under 1.1A, I think we've all have assumed this from our earliest orientations and training sessions when we first became board members, when we are taught primarily Robert's rules and advised that there are several different rules of procedure that you can adopt, but that you should adopt some rules of order. And while I think we have operated de facto under Robert's rules, at least for the period of time I've been on this board, it's never specifically been outlined as our parliamentary procedure in our policy. So it's recommended that we clearly reflect it in our policy.
I think that's a good idea, but this has a problem with it, because if you leave it as it stands right now, this puts us back to the original Robert's rules. It needs to be the current iteration of that, which I think all of us have a copy of, but it needs to be stated in here as that edition rather than just Robert's rules, because it goes back to 1856 or whenever it was when it was.
Well, that might be kind of interesting.
Yeah, probably would.
Well, we'll certainly need to make that revision. And then under paragraph 1.3, we, again, I think almost a year ago, we made some changes. As I think about it now, we didn't actually change or update the policy here, but we did update our procedure. You'll recall that previously the superintendent was not at the table with the board, and indeed it was pointed out to us that under West Virginia law and policy, the superintendent is considered a member of the board, a non-voting member, indeed the secretary of the board. And so we did at least revise our practice, but we thought that we should update our policy as well to, again, to emphasize our transparency as well as accountability, to demonstrate who is eligible to be on the board, and how we want to. We have so many constituencies that are important to our service and our ability to function along with the superintendent in an effective manner, from teachers to service personnel to student government to others, that we wanted to clearly outline how the board will decide going forward how to work with those groups, and making sure that we're being inclusive to include everyone whose input, in addition to the community, obviously, that it's important for us to have. So we try to address that in that paragraph as well. So any questions? Now, this, I guess we do need to, then we would need to entertain a motion to put this out for review.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Mr. President, I just have one thought on this. I don't know. I think it's a stretch to say that the superintendent is a member of the board. The superintendent is not elected to the board. certainly she has, or he, as the case may be, has a place at this desk. But I think we're muddying the waters if we say they're a member of the board.
I was surprised when I first heard Howard Sufer discuss this with us at one of our sessions. And to those of you who don't know, Howard, he's an attorney in the state who has an education practice. And I recall him saying on several occasions that actually under the code, the superintendent is considered a member of the board, and indeed as an officer of the board, as the treasurer and secretary.
No question about that.
And so in his mind, they are actually a member of the board, but they are clearly a non-voting member. And which is why when we were having this conversation, he strongly recommended to us that indeed the superintendent needed to sit at the table with the board, as they do in every other county.
Oh, I agree that the superintendent needs to sit at the table with the board. I must not have been at that meeting, because I don't remember that, but it just seems to me like that kind of muddies the waters.
Well, we don't need to rely on hearsay. I'll get a clarification on that.
And we can certainly speak with Mr. Sufer and
Right.
update the information
Exactly.
to your point to be more clarifying about exactly what that role is. And even if it comes back as non-voting officer of the board, we can write that to be more descriptive rather than simply the membership, to your point, separating between elected and non-elected officials of the board. That's easily enough done during the revision process.
Yeah, great.
Can I ask a question or bring up a point about 1.3? Since you had already brought that up, when it has the student government of Jefferson County High Schools, I'm wondering if we want to limit it to that point, or maybe put a student representative of Jefferson County High Schools, whether it's student government, class president, or somebody else that's appointed. I mean, it doesn't. I don't know if we want to. What if you get a student government person who doesn't want to do it, or several that don't necessarily want to do it or can't be here? I mean, I don't know if that will limit us to the point we wouldn't have enough representation opportunities, or what are your thoughts?
This reminds me of a true story. Student government at the University of Texas had at one point become somewhat of a farce, and so some students decided to actually run a dog for president of the student government, and the dog won. So
Naturally.
So they eliminated the student government because indeed representatives of the student government were by policy serving on certain boards and certain functions for the university. So it was quite an embarrassment. So I get your point.
What was your dog's name?
I'm not going to, that's all the story I'm telling. So I think we could obviously revise that to address that.
Yes, sir.
And according to 1.4, we're going to spend July 4th together next year, just to let you know. I mean, I know that's technically the date we're supposed to do it, but...
Well, I think it's a great way to celebrate the birth of our nation.
On holidays, I think we automatically go to the next day.
Well, we may have to... Well, I think that we can take action to, but thank you. So, all right, we have a motion and a second. I'm sorry.
Ask one other question. A while back, it's been a good while back. Not since any of us have been on the board, but they used to have a representative from Jefferson High School, and I believe a representative from the student government. But I think that went by the wayside because the students became disinterested. and I don't know what the situation would be now, but I think we need to look into that and maybe make the eligibility, if that's the way this goes, make the eligibility as wide as Lori said, in order to have people that are interested.
That are interested
Right.
and are engaged,
Yeah.
yes. Yes, absolutely.
It probably shouldn't be too tight as
Right.
the eligibility.
So we can make some of those revisions and we put it out for review. Any other questions, comments? We should just, I think everybody saw this, but we've also talked a lot, and I know we're going to get better at it, but we've talked a lot about making sure that our documents, our public records are easily accessible. And it's something that I think we could still do a better job, but one reminder is that we still have to be mindful of any disclosures that violate a federal or state statute protecting individual privacy. And so we just wanted to specify in this paragraph that absolutely we will do our best to make documents available to the public, but particularly, there are but privacy issues, obviously, when it comes to individuals, whether they be employees or students, trump those rights of public access. And it's just in there as a reminder to all of us. Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir, we have consideration for a final policy to be placed on review regarding high school grading practices.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Per request by the Jefferson County Board of Education in March, teams of representatives from both Jefferson and Washington high schools convened several times over the last few weeks in order to devise a grading and exam policy that both of our high schools and our school community can live with, without the need to waive or revise the policy each year. This is in response to many concerns from both teachers and parents about the number of tests being administered to our students at the end of the school year. Tonight I present to the board a revised policy that represents our collective efforts. At our meeting in March, when we brought teams, we brought our department heads from both Jefferson and Washington High School to the Paige Jackson room, and we had a vigorous debate about the issue of final exams. And our goal at these meetings was to develop a policy that's fair and consistent and good for kids. Two questions reign supreme in our discussions. How many exams and when should summative assessments per semester or grading period be given? And how much should they weigh per semester or grading period? One of the things that came out of this debate is that we all realize that assessment is important, that we have to assess learning. And that was the common ground we came to, because prior to the meetings, we had one high school that says we like the exam policy as it is, and one high school who was saying we want to waive the policy. And this has come up year in and year out in regard to final exams. The policy as presented here tonight, you all have a copy of that policy, correct? Yes. It is a policy that really is the same as the old one, other than the fact one of the summative, one authentic summative assessment. This is the old policy, counted as 1/7 of the student's final semester average. That language has been removed with stating that one of the summative assessments in the second and fourth 9 weeks will be cumulative. Prior to administering to students, each teacher must provide to the principal or the principal's designee for review a copy of this assessment with scoring guidelines. Critical to this is the fact that each teacher may evaluate student performance using his or her own method, adhering to the prescribed content standards of the course. The method of deriving percent grades must be included in the teacher's explanation of grading procedures, and the school principal must approve the teacher's grading method at the start of each academic year. A copy of the teacher's grading method is to be provided to parents and guardians at the beginning of each school year. So with that communicated, the new high school grades 9, 10, 11, and 12 policy that we're putting out for review reflects language that still values assessment, still values cumulative assessments at the end of each semester without counting it as 1/7 of the final grade. Questions?
Joe, when I was sitting in on some of those meetings with you folks, there was a lot of discussion about, I forgot what they called them now, but things like bell ringers and homework and things like that would only count 5% of the grade. Testing, I think, would be about 60%.
That's correct.
And the rest would be.
We did not. It's a good question. In that meeting, we talked a lot about how much assessments should be weighed versus classwork or homework or bell ringers, and we could have gone on for hours after that about how much something is worth. One of the things that we feel is very important in this policy is that the principal, with the assistance of his or her department heads, that they review each teacher's syllabus to make sure that the grading policy is fair. I'm here to tell you right now that this issue of how students are graded is a hot topic all across the country. How do we assess for learning, or do we assess? Is a grade does a student get a grade first on compliance, or should the grade represent compliance? Should it represent achievement, or should it represent both? That's a hot topic across the country about how we grade. We didn't get that specific in this policy. However, through that debate in that room, we know that's an issue we probably need further discussion on collectively across the two high schools, probably in our middle schools as well, is how do we, what represents learning? Should the grade represent learning and achievement, or should it represent learning, achievement, and compliance, which is a behavioral component? We didn't get, you were in there for some of those meetings with us, and we did discuss it. This policy does not reflect that. However, because a teacher's grading policy is across the principal's desk, we're looking there to make sure that some teachers might say, well, 95% of my grade is test, and 5% is everything else. Okay. And we want to make sure that it's fair, that maybe 80, some teachers say 80% of the grade is tests and quizzes, 20% is homework and classwork. So we're not to the point in this policy where we're dictating that. Maybe we should come to that point, but this policy simply says one of the things we kept is each teacher may evaluate student performance using his or her own method, adhering to the prescribed content standards of the course, and the principal has to observe that and approve that classroom teacher's policy, and it has to go on file that the parent is aware of that policy. It's really important that we share that with the community tonight, that the high school teacher's grading policy is approved by the principal and they have a copy of it, because a lot of the concerns that I do oftentimes, parent is not familiar with the grading, how my child gets graded. And it's very important that we communicate that with moms and dads on an annual basis.
Well, I think it's very important that everybody understands the grading policy. It's also important that everybody understands what's behind the grading, the grade that the kid gets.
I agree.
One teacher might say, okay, I'm going to do 80% on tests, and the next one said, I'm only going to do 40% on tests, and they may be in the same department in the same school.
And that is a concern that I deal with a lot. Some teachers will have a more rigorous grading pattern. They will count homework as 50% of the grade. There's a lot of discrepancies in how a student's final grade is calculated, and that is a big it's a big issue that it's not just going on in Jefferson County but across the country. As we hash out what should a grade really represent? Should it represent learning? Should it be achievement, or should it be behavioral? In other words, I mean, there's a lot of discussion that goes on about it.
It seems like if we're in the education business, then it ought to be achievement. That grade ought to represent the achievement that student has achieved.
I think
because
moms and dads should understand that, and
yeah,
should communicate that clearly to them.
That if it represents achievement wraps all together all of those other components. At least in my mind, achievement represents everything. If they don't do their homework, if they don't attend, if they don't pay attention in class, they're not going to do well on their assessments. So, you know, that one number represents a lot.
Sure does. And it is it's an issue that I think begs for further conversation. And I'm kind of passionate about grading. I always feel like that how we grade our students is a direct reflection of what they've learned rather than what they've done. That's an opinion, though.
Mr. Cable,
it also is,
excuse me just a moment. This is a good discussion. I'd like to continue it, so I'd like to recommend that we actually get this motion officially before us so that we can continue.
fine.
So move.
Second.
Thank you.
So it's out
Please.
for 2 weeks.
Well, we have more questions. No, we haven't voted on it yet.
Oh,
so
okay.
we have more questions, but let's continue with Mr. Cable.
Oh, well, I was just thinking, not only does that one number have a lot to say about what that particular student has done, maybe not what it's capable of doing, but at least what he or she has done. But it's also a reflection on the teacher, the school, and the school system. What do we expect? And if we're willy-nilly hit all over the place, then that doesn't really reflect very well on what we expect, in my mind. So, just some thoughts.
Absolutely great. Fairness and consistency are big words in this conversation, and I think as a district we should make sure that our grades that we assign kids are fair and they're consistent and they reflect learning.
Other questions?
Joe, first of all, I appreciate all the work that this committee did, because I know this wasn't an easy area.
It was a great conversation.
I do have some concerns. I do like, I'm on both sides of the fence with allowing just it open-ended like this. Could one teacher not count that cumulative assessment as 25% and another person count it as 5%? And then is it fair? It appears to me, as it's written, that possibly could.
That's very possible.
But I don't want to be totally prescriptive in saying it counts 1/7. So, I don't know how to solve that.
I understand.
And I'm sure that was part of y'all's discussion as
A
well.
lot of the discussion was that you counted as just as part of the test grade for that semester. The policy states that they take that they are to students at least 2 summative assessments, projects, unit tests, chapter tests shall be given each 9 weeks. One of the summative assessments in the second and fourth 9 weeks will be cumulative in nature.
Some people know material and know the subject, but are not good on cumulative tests.
Good short-term, not long-term.
Yeah, and I see that piece of it as well.
And all of that it was a really good discussion.
I'm sure you had tons of discussion.
But one of the things, I tried to keep it on a common ground, and the common ground was we all realize assessment is important. We have to measure learning. And that's really what brought us together, that we realized that at the end of the grading period, at the end of the semester, that one of those assessments should be reflective of everything they've learned for the halfway point of the year, at the end of the year.
As long as our principals aren't too far apart on this, I think we would be okay. But if we have one principal saying that exam can count as 5% and one saying it can count as 40% or 25%, I think then we have issues.
So it sounds like why you don't want to be prescriptive with boxing teachers into a very specific percentage point, that there's perhaps an appetite for some type of outward limit that would limit the amount of variation that you could have, perhaps a range within which people might feel comfortable operating.
Joe, did you all discuss that
Did you discuss having ranges?
That might.
We did discuss that conversation came up in regard to how we can across 9-12, across what teachers' grading policies might look at in that regard. We did discuss it. Yes.
And we're unable to have rich consensus?
Oh my, it was.
We had about 35 people in that room, and we had about 35 opinions.
and at one point, it was.
Very vehement sometimes.
It was, but it was a really good conversation, and it is Jefferson County is no exception to this. It is a hot topic across the entire country, how we grade and assess kids. How do we come up with that grade? And there's a lot of research on it. There's a lot of experts in the field, and I look forward to maybe having that conversation with our principals in the future and with the board as well, because it is a community issue. Moms and dads are very interested in how their kids' grades are averaged.
I would just say to that point, I know that you're saying that you want to make sure that the parents get a copy and understand, but there's a definite difference between a parent getting a copy of that grading policy and actually understanding that grading policy. Because I can tell you what it looks like in the house is, Mom, can you sign this? I got to get this in tomorrow. I get 10 extra points for my, whatever the case may be.
Absolutely.
Okay, sure. Let's see, 5%, 10%. Yep, good. Here you go. That's what it looks like.
You got 6.
I got 5 or 6 of them.
To sign.
And I have no clue what it means until I get the grade and I think on live grades, how the heck do you have a 65? And I look and he's missed one homework assignment. But it's worth, X number of percentage in that specific class. And I'm freaking out going, you got to be kidding me. How does it get a 0 on that? And so then I make him do it. Well, I'll turn it in, but I'm not getting any points because it's 0 tolerance.
Right.
That class I get 0 tolerance. But so-and-so's class I have to the end of the semester. As long as I turn it in, I get something for it. So this issue of inconsistency is across the board. Yeah.
And
so understanding the grading policy, not
a lot of the experts on this, and Ken Wormley and Ken O'Connor, and there are a lot of experts on this who say that's very, very important, that districts adopt consistent policies that are fair, that represent learning, and that are easily communicated to moms and dads, because that's a big concern. I deal with questions about it all the time, and you have to go to that individual teacher, because you can sit down and look at the live grades progress report for this kid and look at it for the same class by another teacher, and it's a completely different set of rules.
right.
So that's something we really need to work at as a district, and it's exciting because we really are now starting to closely examine what does a grade really represent. Some exciting times in teaching, really.
Well, is it something that should be a part of a grading policy before it even is put out there? Should we have that discussion? Even if it takes us several months to do, should we make it comprehensive to at least discuss it? I guess my other concern would be, I don't know if you saw or not, our friends across the border who have thrown out those testing issues in Loudoun County by saying, we're not going to have them. Because we get so many state tests and whatever. And again, when I look at this policy, I think, what was the issue? The issue all started with, we have too much state testing, We have too many other tests that we're doing, so we do not think it's fair to overburden our students to give them a final exam as well. We don't need it, but yet this policy says you will have a second and fourth 9 weeks assessment. So it begs again for another waiver request to come in and say, it's the fourth 9 weeks, and we still think it's too many exams.
Right.
So I don't know that, I at least, can I have some kind of consensus written up and signed by all those teachers who complain saying, we will agree that this is okay? You know, I don't know, I don't necessarily need that, but to me, that this still says that. It says we are gonna do a cumulative fourth 9 weeks exam. That's what we are doing, and now it's in this policy. Now it's clearly stated in this policy, don't bother asking for a waiver. You know what I'm saying? Like that.
Part of the
Ask for a
compromise.
waiver.
Well, but we want to go down that road again. You know, we want everybody to agree, either yes, we think that we need that much more testing and that type of assessment at the end of the semester, or no, we don't. We are going to do this, this, or this, or you can do a project, or you can do the, yes, it's a summative assessment, but again, even that was a gray area. So does this clearly define that so that we don't have that problem again? And do they feel comfortable with it? That would be my concern.
Well, this doesn't say that there will be a semester exam. It says in the second and fourth
9 weeks.
9 weeks, there will be a summative assessment. It doesn't say it's
It's a summative cumulative assessment, which to me cumulative would mean not till you accumulate all the data, which would mean at the end. But I mean, again, you can split hairs and read it however you want. You're right.
Well, the whole thing of it is, as much as I hate top-down type government, there have to be certain rules, and there have to be certain things in order to not have some of these things that we've talked about.
Right.
You know, so there have to be part of it has to be prescriptive. It doesn't have to be okay. This, right down the steps. It doesn't have to be like that. There can be a range in it, but it does have to be fair to everybody, not just the students in this class, but the students in all those classes. There have to be some rules someplace that set the standard. Okay, the minimum standard, if you want. Otherwise, we're wide open to what we have right now. You know, this teacher over here says, okay, this is my grading policy. The principal says, okay. And so that summative test stands for 20%, let's say. This one over here, who maybe is a little stricter, whatever, says, okay, this summative test is going to be worth 40% or 80% or whatever. So that's not really fair to the students. One class is this and one class is that. So you have to have some rules, or you just have chaos. There's no use in having the rules if everybody's allowed to do whatever they want.
Mrs. Skinner, you?
I do. There has to be a little bit of guidance because of the fact that, let's say, I remember one of the arguments that the teachers gave about not giving exams was with every kid, or most of the kids, it hurt their GPA. It brought their grade down. It very rarely brought a grade up.
That's right.
And if you have a teacher that takes the fourth quarter assessment and makes it 50% of the grade, well, you just change that test from 1/7 of the semester to 1/4 of the semester. So, you know, you just really impacted that child's grade.
Sure.
So it sounds like, not having been involved in this previously, that you made an effort to have a representative sample of both of the high schools sort of organically come up with a set of parameters for this, and being unable to reach a clear consensus on a single one, it sort of turned into this ubiquitous, to your point, Mr. Cable, a policy that says we couldn't decide on a single policy, so we said do whatever works for you, just make sure your principal and the parents know, which is no better than not having one at all. Correct? So it also sounds like it is the will of the board for us to do the difficult work of, if we cannot have 35 people reach a single consensus, for us to do research and best practice and to put out something for our staff to be able to react to that has some sets of parameters that we believe will result in at least an equitable base for students, in terms of not penalizing students who aren't strong testers or who are willing to do all of their due diligence and work very hard, but then their domestic situation doesn't support them doing homework well, but they don't want to be penalized for that, so that we minimize the things that we know don't contribute to student success later on, and then maximize the things that we know do. So it sounds like you would like for us to take this back and do some work on it to bring it back before you again.
And given where we are in the year, do we think we have time to do at least some work on this before the beginning of the school year? So that.
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay.
Yes, sir, we do. And once again, it's important to honor the work of the teachers, which is why this was brought forth. This was the format that they conveyed it in after working with Mr. Levacy through this process, and I felt like it was important to honor that work and to bring it. But it does not sound like it accomplished what ultimately the goal of the division and the will of the board was, to have some parameters for the support of students. I hear that very clearly, and I think we have a responsibility to go back to that membership and quite frankly, perhaps a broader membership, and bring you back something that has better delineated parameters to it.
I think it might be nice too, even to discuss, I don't know what would come of it, but say as a student gets to 11th and 12th grade, that may look even different than 9th and 10th, because 11th and 12th needs to look more like a college type atmosphere, where you have at the beginning of the year a syllabus type idea, and you have this, this, and this that needs to be accomplished, and by the end of that, this is the grade. I don't know if that, how or if that would work, or if they'd even be open to it, but in my mind, I'm thinking by 11th and 12th grade, what are we doing that's preparing them to go to college? Like, what do they need to get used to understand, and to be responsible for, and how does that help them to then take more initiative of their own learning and education to be responsible for it? And so maybe it would be two different ones, or look different.
It's great. What's happening here tonight is a great conversation, and there's a lot of literature on it. And there's a lot to learn about how to assess learning. It's a wide open field right now, and I think the best place to start is to sit down and have great conversations about it, read what the research and literature says about grading. It is not just a 9-12 issue, it is a K-12 issue, and it is something that impacts what we do in the classroom every day. So it's a great conversation, and there's a lot of literature on it that I think we front load with the board, the community. We got to keep the community informed, because many times people in the community expect students to be graded the way they've always been graded, the same way they were graded in 1961 and 1971, 81, 91. That this is the way you grade, and it's a conversation that we have to have with the whole community, and not just with ourselves. We have to talk about it with everybody. So I appreciate this conversation here. I think it's we're headed in the right direction.
I appreciate you taking this on.
No problem.
I mean,
this is what it's all about.
I know it wasn't easy.
And taking it on once again.
And I appreciate you bringing what they gave us to us.
Absolutely.
As well.
Didn't you see the body armor hanging?
I'm sure he has.
So we do have a motion before us, which it sounds like we believe would be, if I'm hearing my colleagues correctly, we would like to have this revisited and brought back to us before we vote to put it out on review. So therefore,
Need to withdraw the motion and the second.
Motion. Okay. Motion is withdrawn.
And the second. Have to withdraw the second.
Did I do that?
Yes.
Okay, withdrawn.
Thank you. Okay. Or do we anticipate any executive session for any issues?
No, sir.
Okay. Wow. Mark, I'm trying to learn from you.
You're doing better. I do have my sleeping bag out.
Any further comments from the board?
No, sir.
Well, I have do you have any, Ms. Scott?
I'm good, thanks.
Since we've been talking grading and assessment, I thought I would take just a moment, and only a moment, to update us on what is happening or not happening in the United States Congress regarding reauthorization of the Elementary, Secondary, and Education Act, known to most of us as No Child Left Behind, which is 7 years past being reauthorized. But one of the there are many things that happen when the same party controls both houses of Congress, one of which is sometimes you see movement on legislation. So I'll just give you a quick flavor of what's going on, because the House last week passed an Elementary Secondary Education Act reauthorization. I spoke to several members after the vote, and many of whom felt like no one felt really strongly, frankly, about this bill one way or the other, which is reflected in the vote. It passed 218 to 213. Now, at the end of the day, the House bill is highly unlikely to look much like whatever the final bill is that is sent to the President, if any is, this Congress for signature. But I'll give you a little bit of flavor of the House bill. It would eliminate the current accountability system known to all of us as AYP. Yet it would require states to intervene in schools that aren't performing well, but it doesn't go on to say how. It would allow states to set their own academic standards and would prohibit the Secretary of would prohibit the Secretary of Education from requiring states to adopt the Common Core, which actually states aren't required to adopt Common Core now. They are given a carrot by the Secretary of Education that if you wanted a waiver from this, or you could be eligible for some additional funds for this type program if you adopt Common Core. But they say that the Secretary of Education cannot use carrots like that. An amendment that was offered on the floor and was adopted would allow parents to opt their students out of the testing requirements and exempt schools from including students that have opted out of the school's participation requirements. So that bill passed, like I said, with by a 5-vote margin. The Senate began debate today on its version of reauthorization, and it's led by the chairman of the Senate Education and Labor Committee, Senator Lamar Alexander, who is both a former state governor, former president of a higher ed institution, and a former Secretary of Education. So he's given great, and understandably so, great deference on both sides of the aisle in the Senate as to his leadership and knowledge on these issues. So that bill began today. They will probably finish it up towards the end of the week. One of the very interesting provisions that is being considered is what's called Title I portability. And this is something that the chairman supports in some fashion, that basically Title I funding would follow the student and not the school. So if you have a student in school X and she transfers to school Y, that school that she was in was Title I eligible, but if she goes to the other school, the funding follows her and doesn't stay at that school.
Won't that be a county?
Yeah, wouldn't that be interesting? The administration doesn't support this, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of horse trading. And this is one of many provisions that seems to have some pretty serious legs, at least in the Senate. So if you can't watch the school board on cable television at night and you want to watch C-SPAN instead, this is an interesting week to watch. So.
And part of that provision is around not putting in incentives for people to aggregate children in poverty.
Right.
Because you only reach Title I funding when you have certain percentages aggregated of children in poverty together. And if you disincentivize that, you may help districts make different. I've been in districts where redistricting decisions were made around aggregating children in poverty simply to be able to pull down the additional Title I funding that was known to be needed by that population. So like everything, there are plus deltas to each one of these, and they have probably altruistic reasons, I'll choose to believe, assume positive intent, for doing those things that might have very negative ramifications for us. But
yeah, so there are a lot of there's going to be a lot of interesting. I mean, we have to respond to and deal with in the trenches, but this is the week that these issues are going to get some very serious attention, and I do expect the bill to pass the Senate. And there's certainly a chance that it will not, but I would expect one to pass by the end of this week. So, just want to give you a sense of what's going on. Any further comments? I'm going to get in under an hour. This meeting's adjourned.